My name is Héctor, and I'm going to be talking about the case study surrounding the question: how have the influx from mainland Chinese immigrants into Hong Kong and the increasing incorporation strategies from China given rise to a division between the identities of these two communities? The global issue in which I will be centralizing a bit is identity. A little bit of historical context. Up until 1997, Hong Kong was a territory administered by the United Kingdom, but because of a treaty signed 50 years before, Hong Kong would be given back in 1997 to China, and it did. Under the sign of British Declaration, Hong Kong would pass from being a territory administered by the United Kingdom to being administered by China, but it would remain a bit of autonomy and independence and sovereignty. Why? Because Hong Kong is ruled by its own constitution, its own set of laws, its own judicial, legislative, and executive powers. The people in Hong Kong are ruled by the Hong Kong government and Hong Kong laws and the Hong Kong police, and the Hong Kong government has a monopoly over the use of violence and taxes in Hong Kong, which makes it sovereign. Talking about migration, in 2017, 20% of the 7,500,000 people were mainland Chinese immigrants. That's 1,500,000 people. Here's a chart that states the amount of people that received the one-way permit from China to Hong Kong, which I will be discussing later. But what you can see now from this graph is that it doesn't show it since 1997, but ever since the handover, more or less, the amount of people, the amount of mainland Chinese immigrants that have come into Hong Kong has remained between 30,000 and 60,000% per year, and that has accumulated to 1,500,000 people in total in 2017. So the reception of this, some people believe that mass immigration is a deliberate policy by the Chinese government to commit cultural genocide against Hong Kong. Why? Well, Hong Kong has a very different culture and society, economically and socially, and maybe politically, from mainland China. It has a lot of Western influence, mainly because of its background being administered before by the United Kingdom, and it's also way more capitalist compared to China. It also had more freedom of media and the press and things like that. China sees Hong Kong to some extent, if we see this from a realist point of view, as an opportunity to expand its power. Under the sign of British Declaration, Hong Kong would remain in its autonomy and sovereignty, but only for 50 years. So, what Hong Kong as from a realist point of view, China will try to do things that would be in their own interest. In this case, trying to incorporate Hong Konger culture, or rather Hong Kongers, into Chinese culture as soon as possible, so they can then incorporate Hong Kong economy into their own economy, because the Hong Kong has the 35th largest economy in the world. It has a really strong economy, and it's one of the most expensive cities to live in. I'm sorry. And this is one side of the coin. On the other side, the one-way permit scheme was originally implemented because there was already a mass immigration going into Hong Kong from Chinese people and maybe some other places. The program only hands out one-way permits to 150 people per day. However, supposedly the priorities that the permits giver take are families or people who have family in China. These are sometimes wives or husbands of people living. The priorities they give is people with families living in Hong Kong, such as couples, married couples, or maybe families with children, or their parents that want to go back from China to Hong Kong to reunite with their family. And there is a lot of people who do have these situations, and in that case, the permit is helping them. There's also people that are not on these situations but want to go to Hong Kong on their own, because of the higher maybe quality of life, the freedom of the press expression, maybe the capitalist economic system and Western culture, and do not want to bring China's culture to them with Hong Kong. However, there has been cases of really not high ranked, but really powerful, economically powerful individuals that supposedly bribe the system in order to go to Hong Kong, and they do not care for Hong Kong culture. They bring Chinese culture with them and are only there because of money. In that case, people have, to some extent, called the program corrupt or illegitimate because it's being used to further help the Chinese supposed agenda of incorporating Chinese culture into Hong Kong. And this is an issue that has been going on for a few years and has sparked protest and discussion. However, there's also the projects which I mentioned in the investigation question, such as the Hong Kong Shushai Macau Bridge, opened in 2018, which is the largest sea bridge in the world, which links the territories of Hong Kong and Macau to the city of Shuhai in China, and that it being one of the largest sea bridges in the world, it greatly facilitates transport between these three places. A lot of people in Hong Kong didn't like this because they felt it was an attack to Hong Kong's sovereignty, and that this would lead even more people to even more Chinese people to come into Hong Kong, something that Hong Kong didn't want, something that many Hong Kong citizens dislike because they would have preferred closed borders to retain, because they didn't agree with China and would prefer to remain as separated from China as possible, which under their own sovereignty would make sense. That under the claims to their own sovereignty would make sense. Another example of this is the railway station in West Kowloon in Hong Kong, which connects it to the high-speed railway system in China. This is a similar situation, but a few years earlier, but also connects China to Hong Kong and facilitates a lot of transportation. So, going back to realism, maybe China is doing this precisely because of maybe China is taking those projects for their own interest, for incorporating Hong Kong economy into their own economy, and to incorporate Hong Kong as a whole into their own society. However, we can also see it from a literalist point of view and talk about globalization, the interconnectedness, and increased commerce between different states, and that maybe China wants these bridges and this link and these other projects to have more commerce with Hong Kong, to incorporate more, and to have relative gains rather than absolute gains, and that both sides can get something from it. That's some ways you can see it. Over the last few years, there have been a lot of protests, some of them related to human rights, to violations of human rights, such as police brutality. But one theme that has remained certain is the constant rather is that the Hong Kongers very often separate their own identity from the Chinese identity. Here we can see that this is Hong Kong, not China, and against the Chinese regime. The protest always, regardless of the cause, separate the Hong Kong and Chinese identity from one another and try to make the Hong Kong identity stronger. A scholar from the University of Hong Kong wrote about this, saying that the projects and mass migration coming from China has, instead of incorporating Hong Kong's Chinese culture, strengthened Hong Konger identity, and has separated it even more from Chinese identity, not only in Hong Kong, but not only in China and Hong Kong, but also within the people in Hong Kong. Here we can see a study from the Hong Kong University, in which the people that identify themselves as Hong Kongers rose from 18% to 42% in 8 years, and the people who identify themselves Chinese went down from 39% to 18%, further supporting the idea that these identities are separating. And why this is important? Well, that dictates the people of 8 million people, the lives of 8 million people, and there's global consequences that are happening all over the world, such as the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Law of 2019 in the United States, which affects global relations as a whole. Thank you very much.